Welcome back, Lorcana players. It's Poisonous. Today we're dropping a new deck. This is a blue-green Reckless deck list that uses a combination of Reckless and the new Jeweled Collar to gain a lot of ink, and then uses that ink to gain lore, play lots of cards, and using Ink Geyser to draw cards back and kind of just outvalue your opponent while forcing them to take unfavorable trades with your Reckless characters. Pretty cool. I'm not usually a fan of blue-green. If anybody is watching that knows me, you know that I often complain about having to play against blue-green, but this deck is pretty fun. It doesn't feel that toxic, so I'm willing to play it. I'll be playing it later tonight on stream if you want to check out VODs of gameplay. That'll be up later today as well. But let's break down the deck list. So this deck list runs Little John and the Bell Popsicle combo as your turn 1 play. Little John is good because he's got 4 health, so when you force opponents to be reckless, he often survives those challenges, and he sticks around if the opponent plays like a turn 1 Cindy and then sings Storm. For 2 drops, we have Helga and Ursula. Ursula obviously is great for removing songs, getting information, and looking in the opponent's hand, and Helga says when this character is challenged and banished, banish the challenging character, so you can do some fun stuff forcing opponents to be reckless and then trading into her. For our Reckless package, we have Bellwether, Louis, and Lyle. We have Cogsworth as a 5-drop. He's great because he gives your characters resist, so when they're being forced to challenge us, the resist makes it so sometimes our characters don't actually perish, and we can get extra value that way. We're running 3 copies of Baymax Giant Robot. He's a nice shift to bring onto the board on our smaller characters and do effective trades. And he's also something that can shift onto anything and help sing Under the Sea. We're running 4 copies of John Silver. He also gives Reckless, but he's got a big body and Quest for 2. We're running 2 copies of Tamatoa as some extra card draw and a way to retrieve the Jeweled Collar if it gets destroyed. We also have Clarabelle as card draw, Grammatala to gain lore every time that we ink. We're running 3 copies of Vision of the Future just to make the deck a little bit better at finding the cards that you need when you need them. 3 copies of Ink Geyser. This is the way that we refill our hand and we kind of cripple our opponent from playing their big stuff. You're Welcome is in here to remove stuff that we can't deal with and put some cards in the opponent's hand to get extra card draws with Clarabelle. 2 copies of Under the Sea to help deal with aggro and some of the warded characters that are hard to remove because the opponent won't exert them, like the Muses or Alice in the Kiwi Birds deck. We have 4 copies of the Jeweled Collar. This is the kind of linchpin of the deck. It makes it so every time the opponent challenges you, they let you ink the top card of your deck, which is very strong. And we're running 1 Emerald Chromacon because we're making a lot of opponents' characters reckless. When they do a trade, we have the ability to bounce characters to their hand, which makes it hard for them to keep a board and get too far ahead on us. So that's the deck list. We'll break down the interactions and go through the pieces that make the deck work. So our ideal opening is turn 1 Little John or Bell Popsicle. Both of them are just as good. I think that the Bell Popsicle is probably a little bit stronger, especially into aggro, because it provides something to stop them from questing or allows us to make good trades. But it's a 2-piece combo, so you don't always get that. So the Little John is also a fine 1-drop. On turn 2, the most important thing is the Jeweled Collar. You really want to get this. You want to mulligan aggressively for this. You don't have it in your opening hand. I would throw everything back except for maybe like if you have the Bell Popsicle combo or you have a Little John, then you keep those but throw everything else back. And you really want to get the Jeweled Collar down as early as possible because the extra ink that you get from it is crazy. It's really what makes the deck so good. When this thing starts popping off, it goes really hard. On turn 3, you'd want Louis, or Lyle's also fine, but Louis' nice because he provides a body that's exerted that almost always provides a positive trade. If you play Louis and they have like a Daisy, they have to sack their Daisy into him a lot of times and they don't get any value and he stays alive. So he's a really good card. I think that he's one of the best new set 8 cards. At least in certain builds, he's really strong, and I think he's like a well-designed card. As alternatives, on turn 2, if you don't have the collar, then Helga Sinclair is okay because you can play Lyle on 3, forcing an opponent to have a reckless character, and then they take out Helga, and when they do that, she gets the crack back, and your opponent loses a lore if they have any lore. So it's a nice little opening alternative line, but I think the top line is definitely stronger. And if you force them into being reckless and you have the collar down on 3, then you can play a 5 cost like Cogsworth on turn 4 with your extra ink, or you can shift Baymax onto Little John or Louis, depending on what you have left on the board. But the nice thing about Baymax is he heals those characters that he shifts onto, which works well because they've been challenged and damaged potentially, and now you have a good sized body to kind of proceed through the opening with. So those are the things that you want to look for in the opening. Pretty straightforward. You don't hit your turn 2 collar and you don't have Helga, then you could also run like the Vision of the Future and try and dig for your jeweled collar, or at least make the best pick from those next 5 cards. Ursula is also fine on turn 2. I think that's pretty obvious that if you're playing in Steel Song or something that's relying on songs like Discard, that you can play on 2. I think it's more important to get the collar down and start the trading and getting the extra ink, but Ursula on 2 is also a fine play. The most important interaction in this deck, I think, is the Jeweled Collar. So it says, whenever one of your characters is challenged, you may put the top card of your deck into your inkwell face down and exerted. This works well with all of our Reckless cards. I just put a couple here as an example with Louis and John Silver, but this also feeds really well into the win con with Grammatala. With Grammatala, she gains a lore for us every time we gain an ink. So that means that if we have a Grammatala down on the opponent's turn, when they're challenging our characters, they are giving us a lore each time because we're inking the top card of our deck. So it's pretty easy to trigger this. And also, when we get up to a high amount of ink, if we get her down and then we play Ink Geyser and we start inking each turn again, then we are also gaining lore that way. So it's a nice way to get some extra lore, and she's got a lot of health. So even if she's exerted and the opponent starts challenging, if it takes multiple characters to finish her off, you get to ink a card each challenge. So you can sometimes gain 2 or 3 lore just as they're taking out Grammatala. You have multiple jeweled collars down, then every challenge you would gain like 2 ink and gain 2 lore and so on. So it can get out of hand really fast if we're ahead of the opponent and they have to start attacking our characters to get rid of them. Then, it can be really crippling with the Grammatala. I'm only running 2 copies though, because sometimes the opponent is the aggressor and we don't need that extra lore, and she's just kind of like a win more, or she's too slow for that matchup. So she's in here in a limited number, but she is really strong, and it's an interaction that works well, especially into like slower, more control-y decks or mid-range decks. Then you can run the Grammatala combo and use that to win out. We have 4 different cards in our Reckless package. The first one is Louis. He's new, and he enters play exerted and gives a character Reckless, which is really strong because it means that in the opening, when you might not have an exerted character, you give the Reckless and an exerted character that almost always gets to trade. There's not very many characters that can challenge into him and not either trade or just lose the challenge. We're running 2 copies of Lyle. Lyle is a good card because he gives a character Reckless on play, but when one of your other characters is banished, your opponent loses a lore, which is a nice way to slow them down, especially more aggressive decks. 2 copies of Bellwether, and she gives Reckless each time that you put an ink in your inkwell during your turn. This means that you put her down, and then every turn after that, or including that turn, you ink a card and you give an opponent's character Reckless. So it's not required as an on play, which can be easier to just keep giving Reckless to something that can quest for a lot every turn and kind of keep it locked. Even if you don't have a character to challenge, it stops them from questing, which is good. So the Lyle and the Bellwether are similar but different. So they're kind of like the toolbox of our Recklessness. And we also run the big John Silver. He has Reckless on play and on quest. So basically he can dish out Reckless every turn unless he's challenging somebody, which is really useful. And his 5/5 body is something that opponents can't usually effectively deal with, so you get good value with him. And he can just kind of quest out and win the game, keep the opponent locked. And he's a really good card. He's hard to remove off the board. For our draw package, we have the Big Clarabelle. This is kind of the best way to draw cards. You ramp up to 7, play Clarabelle, and draw till you have as many cards as your opponent. And then you try and force them to have more cards using your Welcome or the Chromacon to bounce things back to their hand. You can also draw cards using Tamatoa. Recycling our Popsicles is a great way to get extra card draw. And you can play items for free, so you can get that Emerald Chromacon down when he quests, or you can play another Jeweled Collar for free. Both of these cards are really good in their own right, so they work well with some of the synergies that this deck is already running. Our deck is a challenger deck, relies on our characters taking damage, so the Popsicles are great to recycle and heal up our characters and keep them alive so they can be challenged again and again. We have a third way to draw cards, and that's with Ink Geyser. So Ink Geyser lets you return all the ink from your inkwell except for 3. So if you're up to like 9 ink, when you play Ink Geyser, you're going to draw 6 cards out of your inkwell. So this is a pretty good way to refill your hand. We have more ink than our opponent, then we're gaining more cards than them, and we're putting them at a low ink count. So you really ideally want to do this after you've set up a bigger board. You have at least one large character out, like a John Silver, a Clarabelle, or the Grammatala. There are times though where you just need to do it to stop your opponent from having access to their big stuff, or we're really desperate for cards, so it's just a good way to draw some cards and start the ramping over. If you have a Jeweled Collar down, it's pretty easy to get your ink back. What I would suggest is that when you have this strategy in mind, is that early in the game when you're inking big characters makes sense. It's not a bad thing to put your Clarabelle and your Grammatala and your Welcome, all of those cards that are kind of later game plays, into your ink and not save them, because when you draw out of your ink, it's really great to hit into some of those cards so you have them back later in the game. I think that being strategic about what you're inking is important. When you ink small stuff like Little John, he's not that great to draw again later in the game when you're drawing out of your ink. So it makes sense to put the cards that you want to draw later into your ink when possible. Obviously, you have to do what makes sense for your curve, but there is some strategy in what you ink, so that way you get as good of draws as possible when you do play Ink Geyser and draw the cards out of there. So just keep that in mind. It's something to be aware of. The last card that I want to talk about is Under the Sea. This card is really great against aggro decks and decks that are running warded characters like Alice or Cogsworth or the Muses. We have 2 copies just to help deal with those. And the nice thing about it is that it's a sing together, and we have lots of big characters, so it's not too hard for us to have 8 cost worth of singers on the board. But we also have access to the Baymax Shift, and you can shift him onto like a 1-drop Little John, and he's a 6 cost, and now that makes it really easy to have enough to sing Under the Sea and remove your opponent's cards, put them on the bottom of their deck. And I've had a lot of people just concede once you do the shift and Under the Sea their board and take away everything that they've built, because then you just make everything else reckless and then you win out the game. So it's nice as a way to fight your way back, especially against matchups where they're quite far ahead. The Under the Sea is a good way to equalize that, as it's a one-sided board wipe a lot of times, and it's a good card for this deck. So those are the interactions. That's the deck list. I think that you'll enjoy playing this deck. Check it out later when I'm streaming. You can see the matchups that I get and how to play through the deck. But I have been testing it online already, and it's done fairly well. Obviously, it's not like a tier 1 meta deck, but it is fun and competitive, and it gives you a lot of agency over how to play it. I think that it's a bit more involved and a bit more interactive and fun than other blue-green decks, which is nice. But it also will keep your opponents guessing a little bit when you come with a deck that's not a meta deck, and that element of surprise can often, win you matchups in unfamiliar games for them, where you know what their deck's doing, but they don't know what your deck is doing and how to, successfully stop it. But we got lots of different ways to win through stalling, through removing their characters with Reckless, through Under the Sea, through Gaming Lore with Grammatala. So it is very versatile. As always, thanks for checking out the video. I really appreciate your support. If you're not subscribed, smash the subscribe button, like the video, leave a comment, and follow the link to my Twitch channel. Follow me on there and check out all my streaming. We're going to be playing some new and interesting decks this week, and I'm going to be playing this one tonight. Cheers.